Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Naomi Phillips. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Policy and Research at the Learning and Work Institute, and we are your hosts for this event this afternoon. And we are here to talk about Multiply, the government scheme to improve numeracy skills. We're going to run through a few presentations and discussion with some really key speakers, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers as well. What I'd really like to let you know is that you can pose questions through the event, throughout the event during Slido, and we'll potentially be responding to those in the chat, but also we'll be picking those up for our speakers and panel as well. We're recording the event and we're also going to share that in the follow-up. And I'm going to leave it there because we've got a pretty packed agenda. And I'm going to hand over to Stephen Evans, who's Chief Executive of the Learning and Work Institute. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Naomi. Afternoon, everybody. So what I was going to run through is a little bit of the work that we've done at the Learning and Work Institute about the need for adult basic skills training, and some of the evidence about need and about what works as well, and a few ideas that we have to spark off your thoughts, hopefully, about some of the opportunities that Multiply brings. So if we can ping on to the next slide, please. So first of all, importance. Now, I'm going to really sort of run through this very quickly. So you've all signed up for a webinar about Multiply, so I'm preaching to the converted here, I think. But we know that the really big employment, earnings, social benefits from gaining improved literacy, numeracy, digital and other essential skills. So there's kind of loads of benefits there. It's really increasingly important for life and for work. And yet we have 9 million adults across England with low literacy or numeracy, about 13 million, I think, with low digital skills, and the number of adults taking part in learning across England is now 63% since 2012. So we've gone backwards from a low base on these really critical skills, and that's why Multiply is really welcome. It's not all the answer, but it's really welcome, I think. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So this kind of illustrates that picture, as I mentioned. So got these huge drops in English and maths participation across England and right across the board, really, across we had data for combined authorities and for London. So that kind of really shows that picture, and it's, you know, it's a fairly constant shade of red and orange really across the board there. The ESOL column was a bit lighter actually in terms of drops. That's partly because the bigger drops came before that due to previous rule changes. So from the heady skills for life days, we've really gone backwards in terms of participation, and we need things like Multiply to really help reverse that. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So first of all, understanding local needs. So I know all local authorities and combined authorities have had their indicative allocations for Multiply, and next task is to draw up those investment plans by the end of June, I think it is, about understanding where your local need is, and then how you're going to meet that, and how that, for me, also a big question about how that fits in. We'll come on to this later, how that fits in with other provision that includes literacy and digital, because although the government's done Multiply separately, I think these things all kind of need to be seen together in the round, but also other provision that you have as well. So one of the things we've done is to develop a mapping tool to try and assess the number of people at local level with low literacy and numeracy. So I won't go into the details of how we've come up with this, but it basically splits out young people aged 16 to 24. So how many within that group with different qualification levels are likely to have low literacy and numeracy? And then similarly for those 25 plus or 25 to 64-year-olds, how many of those are likely to have low basic skills, low essential skills, sorry, and again, split between those in work and out of work. So we've got three groups that we've modelled, young people by qualification level and those aged 25 plus by employment status. And what we can do is we can break that down by combined authority, by local authority, and by ward level as well. So we kind of illustrated this here with, I should have really held a quiz to see who could identify the mayoral combined authority region, but at least one of the speakers ought to win, given he's from this combined authority. So this is the West Midlands, for those of you who didn't recognise it. And what this shows by ward is our estimated proportion of people in that ward with low literacy or numeracy. So that's the left-hand side, and the absolute numbers with those low literacy or numeracy, that's the right-hand side. So some of this will tell you stuff you probably know. So for example, larger population areas are going to have more people, and more deprived areas are more likely to have those with low essential skills. But it does help sort of think about, I think anyway, think about where that need is concentrated, and then also thinking about your current provision. Is that mapping up against where people are distributed, or are there particular areas or groups that you might want to think about targeting with that extra multiplier resource? So already working with a number of you on applying this modelling to your particular areas. You might have your other ways of assessing local need, which is fine, but if anyone does want to talk to us about how we might support with that mapping down to ward level and split by age group, then very happy to do so. So please either pop something in the chat or drop us a line separately. Very happy to talk to you about that. So that's something about assessing local need. Lots of ways to do it. You know, kind of data's not massively available at local level, but we hope that the mapping tool we've developed might kind of add some value for some of you in terms of getting down to local authority and ward level. So that's understanding local needs. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So what works? So the stuff I'm about to go through on the next couple of slides is based on two things. So first is a what works review of adult essential skills that we did a couple of years ago, and right on the last slide there's going to be a link to some of these things as well. And then also we've done some work over the last year in 2 or 3 geographic areas across England, trying to sort of get down below the data and go and talk to people delivering on the ground and see what they think works and how well that matches to the evidence review that we did. And that's forthcoming research that should be out in due course. And I think the things that really came out for me was one, concerted promotion. So our adult participation in learning survey, which we've been doing for 30 years, it's the biggest, longest running survey of adult learning in the UK, as far as I'm aware. That found that only 1 in 3 of people in the target group we're talking about here knew that there was a basic skills learning entitlement. So 2 in 3 didn't. And one of the providers that we spoke to said nationally there's no push from this, and we really need a push towards improving your basic reading and writing. And actually another piece of forthcoming research where we've looked at international examples really shows the difference that some of that local and national push, raising awareness of why this matters and that there is help available, thinking about the different barriers to literacy and numeracy, because people approach those differently. I think that's really critical. So I'd be very interested to hear about what you're doing around promotion and if that's featuring in your investment plans. Secondly, around tailoring messages. So there's a nice quote here about calling courses anything other than maths, basically. So it's only people like me that probably would turn up if they called it a maths course. So talking about how this kind of can help children with homework, or kind of what motivates them, whether it's budgeting with the cost of living crisis at the moment. So again, lots of evidence around that tailoring of messaging. Thirdly, different methods for getting hold of people. So lots of different mechanisms depending on who your target groups are, going back to that target group point earlier. So some of these referral pathways, my sense is that they've kind of in many places got a little bit degraded over the past decade because of funding cuts, both to adult education services but also to local authorities and many others as well. So how can Multiply help to rebuild some of these links? I suspect financial advice services are going to be pretty overwhelmed actually with the cost of living crisis over the coming months. Is that could improve numeracy actually in the context of financial support help with that as well? Obviously the government needs to give people some more money as well, but can these things help? And then role of employers. So I think the bulk of people with low literacy or numeracy are going to be in work, just because 75% of working age adults are in work. But actually, sort of, how do you engage employers? And actually, there was a kind of set of messages around people not wanting to come forward at work and saying, I've got an issue with whether it's numeracy or literacy or whatever, because they think that's going to be bad for their prospects. So I think there is a question mark. I'd be interested to know about people's approach to working with employers. But I think the key last thing across this slide is not doing maths on its own. So thinking about literacy, numeracy, digital, other skills together, and contextualizing it for what people are interested in, and having a big push on awareness and engagement that's kind of got lost a bit over the last decade of funding cuts. So next slide, please, talks about delivery. What do we do in provision? And again, it's kind of similar stuff, really, I suppose. So there was lots of the providers we spoke to talk about making sure provision doesn't feel like, it's going back to a classroom or back to school or something, and is quite sociable and flexible in terms of delivery and really tailored to individuals as well. I know a big focus in the Multiply prospectus, and a number of the local authorities we've spoken to have said qualifications matter, and the DfE definitely wants to see some more of those as well, but actually the wider outcomes are really critical here. So we've got some experience working with adult education providers in England, thinking about how you measure some of those wider social benefits, like confidence and well-being and engagement in other public services and all that kind of stuff. So I think you don't want to layer extra layers of bureaucracy and questionnaires onto people and providers, but I think be interested in people's approaches to this, and very happy to share some of our research looking at how you do this as well. And then the tailoring provision, I think I've kind of covered off that point, and playing into those broader needs as well. So that quote at the bottom, this was before the latest cost of living crisis kicked in, so this is likely, of course, to have exacerbated. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So yeah, so this is kind of really a question for all of you as much as anything. So one of the things we've been thinking about is, we know there's loads of really interesting numeracy provision, but also literacy and digital and other provision going on across the country now. Is there something about how we share that practice across different local authority areas and across the country? And is there something about how we think about innovation? I know that's something that's within the DfE prospectus, although it's kind of a bit of a sort of what does this mean thing, or what do they mean by this thing? So I think this is kind of an open question. We've been mulling this idea about building a sort of a network across the country that would try and look at what works, look at experiences, give communities of practice for practitioners as well, allow commissioners to share experience, and allow experience, again, embedding those wider outcome measures that I talked about as well. So I think what I'm interested in, this is kind of, that's why there's a question mark on the slide. Do you feel like you've already got that kind of covered off, or the DfE are going to sort it all out? Or actually, is there a bit of a gap here? Would anyone be interested in talking to us about what this might look like, how we might make it work, what you would want to see from it? So an open question there. And then just onto the next slide, please. There you go. I knew there was, I got a bit tentative there, didn't I? I thought there was one more slide, but I was just checking. So yeah, this kind of just summarizes some of the evidence sources that I've referred to there. So you probably can't click into these hyperlinks on Slido, but we'll try and find a way to either get the links into the chat or share them afterwards or something. But we've got a lot of evidence here that's kind of all on our website. We've got a lot of expertise in the team as well. And I think the key things for me are, one, mapping those essential skills needs. So again, very happy to talk to anyone about the model we've built, or hear about the other approaches that you're using to do that locally. Secondly, does what I've said about the evidence of what works to get people in and then deliver the provision, does that kind of match up? Are there any really interesting ideas that you're aware of, or interesting things that you've done that you think it's kind of worth flagging up to those working on this? And then thirdly, it's investment plans at the moment, and then there's going to be some stuff getting delivered. How do we make sure we spread that best practice and we promote innovation where that's appropriate as well? And we think about multiplying the context of the adult education budget and other provision as well. So kind of thoughts and ideas around that. So some of this is our take on the evidence, our take on the, kind of what works and some of the challenges, but also hopefully some questions both for our speakers and for everyone dialed into the event as well. So I shall pause there and hand back to you, Naomi.
Great, thank you so much, Stephen. So we are now going to go to our panelists. I'm really pleased to say today that we're going to be joined by Helen George, who's the Assistant Director for Education, Skills and Employability at the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, who's also got her colleague Roger Wild as well here to support with questions and answers. We've got Tony O'Callaghan, who's a Senior Project Manager at the West Midlands Combined Authority, and Henry Laws of the West of England Combined Authority. So a huge amount of skills and experience coming up. We are going to hand over to the speakers who are going to speak very briefly for no more than 5 minutes. Please keep it to 3 to 5 minutes. And they're going to be talking about what the opportunities are provided by Multiply and anything that's missing, what the adult numeracy needs are in their regions and how they're mapping those and understanding those, and also how are they ensuring join up across the region and Multiply with all the other priorities that they're working on as well. So I will hand straight over to Helen to kick us off for a couple of minutes. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Naomi, and thanks for saying what I am going to talk about. Some of that's slightly scary because, of course, we're right at the beginning of the journey, in the same way that everybody else is, it's quite a challenge actually to get started. Really helpful to have your pointers towards data and evidence, and I'm sure that will be really helpful. What of course we do know is for South Yorkshire that we have a low skills base, and that cuts across many areas, but we are very aware that we've got a higher number of people than average who have no formal qualifications. And that means that numeracy, alongside literacy and ESOL, are big issues for the area. That's been evidenced recently through our local skills improvement plan. We didn't ask any specific questions about numeracy in there, but there are some clear messages about the importance of numeracy skills to things like problem solving, to things like effective young people in particular effectively joining the workplace, and even up as far as sort of accountancy skills and commercial skills, where you can really see that the lack of skills causes problems for our businesses. Stephen raised a really important point about the importance of English and literacy skills to being able to improve on numeracy, and that's something that was evidenced through some work recently that we did with LWI within South Yorkshire, learning from experiences of people who have delivered. And we've got a really good employer example from Pretty Little Things of starting with an ESOL programme, leading to a much bigger programme across all of basic skills and including numeracy. So there clearly is demand, and there clearly is an issue for us in South Yorkshire, and it's one that absolutely is affecting performance. So just a little bit on the way that we're starting to take that forward. Clearly our local authorities are our sort of strategic partners in this. And we've got some work on at the moment to work out what our strategic priorities are for the programme for the area. So that's thinking about whether it is workplace, whether it is family, community settings, trying to think about what those skills for numeracy might be. You know, we want to explore things about whether maths is a barrier to completion of apprenticeships, and that's not necessarily saying we would deliver through this, but being able to use this as a way of looking at the barriers to wider skills, I think is important. There's a big piece around what we need to do to build capacity within the region, because my sense is that this is not just about delivery, but is actually an opportunity to really address gaps that we have and problems that we have, for example, around teaching staff and the availability of staff, around whether we can do something on materials, around communications and potentially champions. And I think we want to explore what the link is between what we will do and the kind of the national offer, the national online offer. Also setting that in the context of other delivery across the region through AEB, apprenticeships, traineeships, and all the rest. So it's a big challenge for us to be able to get this work done within the timeline, but we are starting to make some good progress with that, and with consulting outward from the Mayoral Combined Authority to bring home views. So yeah, really important, and a really important challenge for us.
That was great, succinct, to the point, and full of information. So thank you so much, Helen. I'm going to hand straight over to Tony O'Callaghan from the West Midlands. Tony, over to you.
Naomi, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be involved today. I think it's one of the pieces of work that we're really focused on. So, just taking a lead from the three elements that have kind of been talked about. What opportunities will Multiply provide as we see them? The opportunity for Multiply, it's an incredible opportunity, particularly for the West Midlands, where we've got 1 in 10 adults with no qualifications, and I know that those kind of figures have just been talked about. We are really keen to place this in the context of levelling up, and in some ways, without movement in this space around this Multiply agenda, we're not sure how levelling up can really be achieved. So we see it as a concerted focus on how we might engage and support adults to develop those numeracy skills. Stephen's already really clearly outlined that better numeracy improves people's chances of getting jobs, improving their earnings, having better health and well-being, as well as a much broader range of benefits as well. Workforce with good numeracy skills is important to business. We're hearing that directly from business, and in order to boost productivity, increase profits, and improve retention, we know that a number of employers that we've started to engage with are keen to look at this agenda as well. Again, Steve has mentioned that the increase we face in the terms of cost of living. It's even more critical given the kind of backdrop we have at the moment, that we support people to understand and manage the finances they have. We've got a real concern about the lack of focus on literacy too. I know that's been mentioned, but again, just to reinforce that, that's really important alongside this agenda. And in part, for us, the devolution of AEB allows us to think about how we can do this locally, and not being driven by central government. So in terms of that backdrop, what we're kind of focused on very much is the needs in the area. Again, it's been highlighted. I did recognise the map, Stephen, and I can actually identify where I live as well. So that's a nice, useful map. But what the map does tell us, is clearly and starkly the kind of the need in the locality. So we are using that modelling that Learning and Work Institute have done, alongside work with local authorities, our local enterprise partnerships. We've got a local observatory that works across a number of our local authorities that, again, is supporting that analysis. So we know that kind of 17% of those aged 16 to 24 have issues in this area. This matches the profile of our current learners across the board. A good percentage of those are in work, over 60%, and 36% roughly of those are out of work. So we're starting to understand the picture in more detail, but we understand as well we've got very significant variations across 7 local authorities that form the West Midlands Combined Authority. And it's really important that we focus on those variations down to ward level, because what we want to do as well is align what we're aiming to do, what we're trying to develop, alongside local task forces, and there are a number of those in the region, so that we land this at a local level. So we'll use Multiply to develop our capacity and capability to deliver numeracy across the board. We recognise that we can't just put provision on and expect people to turn up. I think it was Minister Burghardt himself who said that, as the son of a maths teacher, he recognises that people with the right support can do maths. And I think he's right, but I think the problem is often attracting those people to it. So we're putting a lot of thought into how we can create collaborative messaging and marketing, so that what we don't have is 7 local authorities, 3 LEPs as our strategic partners, all pushing out different messages about how people could access this support. So we're very much looking at how we can bring that together to create a central message on which we can all operate, and then engage a whole range of not only learners but also employers in that space as well. So that's a real key focus for us, and I think Stephen made the point about not calling it maths. So we have had a range of conversations about how we might market these opportunities. Maths doesn't often feature in that, I have to say, but I'm happy to to keep you in touch with how we develop that messaging and that marketing as a kind of product moving forward. The other bit was about how we join things up. So absolutely critical that we join this up, and not least because what we've explained to our partners and our stakeholders is that we don't want to see this as a flash in the pan. We want to see this as a long-term piece of work that supports the residents in the West Midlands. So we need it to link to wider adult education budget provision, not least to ensure it doesn't duplicate, but also to ensure it adds value across the region. But we also want to use that to build our understanding and capability for the longer term, so that we can embed this, but also it can inform our provision moving forward. We are working with government, and we're talking about under our Trailblazer devolution deal about a single skills funding pot. So as opposed to us receiving a number of different funding streams, how might this operate as one skills funding pot, which gives us a range of flexibilities in terms of both how it's commissioned and delivered. So we'd like to include in that single skills funding pot discussion a range of funding streams that for us would create a broad and coherent offer across the region, and as I say, give us a degree of flexibility in terms of how that's applied locally. We know that adult participation in learning show that the best way of creating lifelong learners is to get them successfully started. So we're keen to get that messaging right, to get the early engagement right, so we can set people on that path to lifelong learning, but then equally provide the progression routes, particularly from Multiply, if that's the starting point, into our further learning or additional opportunities that are available. That will be particularly helpful for us to build into our sector plans and our pathways. So we've launched a health and social care plan. We have in development and are almost ready a business, finance, professional services plan, engineering, manufacturing, and what we're doing is factoring Multiply and that maths element into those plans, so that we contextualize it for employers as well. And the last bit for us is we're also trying to really clearly link this with other UK SPF priorities around community and place. It's been mentioned already, but supporting business and that employment support landscape, we're looking to develop that currently, not least given the integration of LEPs into our combined authority area, and how we take what's been done in that in those areas and build on that for the benefit of local business. And we recognise that numeracy plays a role across all of those. So that's a very brief whistle stops tour, Naomi, in terms of our approach to those three elements.
Great, thank you. And again, a huge amount of information there. That and I just want to remind people that if you've got questions, you can sort of put them in the chat in the Slido. That would be really helpful. If you've got anything really specific that you want to ask, that's also absolutely fine. And we can put our panel on the spot as well. And absolutely, this is really about kind of sharing information and thoughts and kind of challenges as well. So do please use that function. I am now going to hand over to Henry Laws from West of England Combined Authority. Henry's going to speak same format just for a few minutes, and then we're going to break out into a Q&A session. Thanks so much, Henry.
Hi, thanks for giving us the opportunity to come and talk to the meeting. So Multiply, we see Multiply as being very important. We're a relatively highly skilled region in terms of the national average, but we do have some significant challenges around, shared with other areas around as well, around numeracy skills levels, both within our employed population and our unemployed population, in terms of not just being able to meet business needs and sort of the needs of key sectors, but also in terms of supporting our residents to really manage their day-to-day lives, be able to progress within work and raise their standard of living, etc. I suppose for us, key issues do revolve around some of our key sectors. So we have issues within construction, transport and logistics, health and social care, and the visitor economy in terms of numeracy skills levels. And we've been doing quite a lot of work trying to look at the region, both from a top level perspective, looking at national reports and extrapolating down to our level, but also engaging across a wide range of our stakeholders to kind of look at what are some of the, what's the scale, what are the causes of these issues, what are the barriers to adults sort of addressing these issues, and then what solutions should we put in place. And in many ways, those barriers are things that I'm sure that you've all sort of been thinking about. Lack of confidence with maths, challenges relating to experiences at the time of schooling, and lack of kind of understanding of why maths and numeracy issues are important in terms of progression. We've also noted some of the barriers actually revolve around the type of provision that's available. Does it engage people? Does it help build that confidence? Is it bite-sized learning leading to more formal qualifications? And then also, I think some issues around staffing levels. So do we have enough teachers available? Do they have the right resources? Is provision offered in the right settings that engages people in the community, in the workplace? How do you engage employers on this kind of agenda when they've got such a lot of challenges facing them at the moment? So I think we'll be looking at a blended approach, both for the employed and the unemployed, and trying to build those resources as well, because I'm sure that most areas would say that actually the money that we can put against this challenge won't be able to cater for the full range of issues that we find. In terms of join up across the region, we are lucky enough to have devolved adult education, so we can at the very least support progression into devolved AEB and handhold residents to a point where they can engage meaningfully with that level 2 provision. Also, it supports the economic development activities we do as a combined authority, and also our work with things like the Wave 3 boot camps and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a very brief whistle-stop tour. I'm not sure whether I'm on time or not, but I'm very happy to take any questions from anybody that they might have.
You are perfectly on time. So that's great. Thank you. We are now going to go straight into the Q&A. Can I ask all of our panelists to put on your cameras? I think Mike. So what I'm going to do is just going to kick off with a pretty big question and open out to kind of whoever wants to kick it off first. So what we've heard from all of the speakers, and Roger, please do join us as well if you're there. What we have heard about is all sorts of things we're doing in practical ways. But I wonder if there are particular areas for innovation that you can see here, things maybe doing things in a bit of a different way to how you've done it before, or is it very much kind of going through existing channels or ways of working? I don't know if Henry or Tony had any thoughts. Henry, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure that we've identified innovation, but we've definitely identified areas where there's not enough funding being put against solutions. So do we have that do we invest enough in small classroom sizes where you can really engage with people, do bite-sized chunks of learning that build people up? Often, formal education settings require larger classroom sizes. They require the learner to come to the institution as opposed to bring the institution to the learner. So that kind of investment will enable us to really support some of those people that haven't been able to develop those skills so far, and also haven't felt either the need or the confidence to develop those skills as well. So yeah, that would be for me.
Great, thanks, Henry. And Tony, any thoughts on this, kind of any areas of where you see room for innovation in all of this?
Yeah, it's just picking up on Henry's point. I think there are a range of things we're focused on. Not least, we're challenging and asking our partners about innovation in delivery and how we can focus on a different kind of a different area for delivery, whether that's flexible delivery, whether it's blended delivery, or whether it's just the way it's delivered in current settings. And the other area we're particularly keen to focus on around innovation is the marketing piece. Is how do we reduce negative attitudes to maths? How do we raise awareness of what we're going to do? And we want to try and do that differently than we've done previously. So there's two kind of key areas I think for us. It's the innovation in delivery, and it's the innovation in how we market what we might do in the space.
And are you using any particular kind of new tools or insights, or to kind of think about that marketing piece actually, and the really, really important piece around kind of access and attracting people and kind of letting people know this is for them and available? Is there anything kind of new or different that you're doing there? I mean, how are you sort of going about shaping that marketing model?
What we've done as a starting point, we ran the career learning pilot, and we worked with National Career Service on career learning pilot to develop some marketing materials, which were a little bit different to what we had done previously. So we shared those with stakeholders and partners to say, we don't need necessarily to do what we've always done, and we've asked again partners for examples of how they've marketed different courses, different provision in different ways. So I suppose we're at the point where we're trying to establish what a better marketing method might look like, as opposed to having the answer at this point in time. But we're exploring the unusual and what might attract people outside of the normal sort of advertising campaigns.
Great, thank you. Stim, did you want to come in on this, or I'll kind of ask my next question.
Well, let me just add a very quick point, which is I think this is and there's a point in the Q&A as well about cultural attitudes to maths as well. So you know, which is kind of, you know, broader than one single adult education program probably. So kind of that linking up point is really important. But I think the sort of points that both Tony and Henry have made about how you engage people in the first place, and we know some of this stuff, and some of us know some of this stuff, and we might know something that's happened locally, or someone else might know you know, something else they've done. But I think we don't necessarily have the sort of hard evidence where we've kind of tested it in a test, learn, adapt approach, or shared some of that experience elsewhere. Of course, different areas are different, but there are some commonalities in approach. So I think some of those behavioural messaging approaches, and then some of the things we learned during Skills for Life as well, I think we kind of need to reignite a little bit.
Yeah, really interesting. And it kind of actually does lead on to my next question, which is really thinking about kind of best practice as well, and how we're sharing these ideas. So if we're thinking about different ways of approaching some of these challenges, but also what we know is working well, how can we, or how can kind of regions and local areas spread best practice? And, you know, whether it's across the piece, so it's actually kind of in the provision, or it's in the marketing, or it's in the kind of how you're broadening access. Henry, I don't know if you've got any reflections on that.
You mean in how we can work together?
Yeah, how you can work together, and actually really how, I suppose it's around kind of learning. So this feels like this is a kind of, you know, this is a complex field that we're all working in, you know, and actually we really want to make sure that there are the best outcomes possible through this program. So how are you thinking, or how would you like to be working in a way where you're able to understand like the best practice that is happening in other areas, but also you're able to share what's working for you?
I mean, certainly we're working with other combined authorities to share approaches and understand how they're addressing some of those challenges. And we have quite frequent meetings between us and the other combined authorities around the nation on a range of issues as well. In our area, our LEP area and our combined authority area aren't actually coterminous. So we have another local authority area that sits outside of the MCA, but is part of the LEP area. And we're working with them again to look at the commonality of issues and also discuss and share approaches. I think moving into operational delivery, thinking this is a 3-year program, it'll be interesting to actually start to look at some of that outcome-based stuff as well, and how well different approaches are delivering against outcomes when they're trying to address similar challenges. And I think we'll have to see how we can do that as we move forward, certainly through the remainder of this first year and then on into the second year as well.
Great, thank you. Stephen, did you have any reflections on kind of what Tony's been saying there in terms of what you understand and what you know to be a great way to kind of share good practice?
Well, this is so I'm always struck when I go and talk to different people about, so, you know, numeracy is one thing, but just all topics. There's some brilliant stuff going on, but not always everyone knows what other people are doing, or what they've tried that doesn't work actually, because what doesn't work is as important as what does work. So I was just reflecting on the experience we had around programs to help people progress from low pay, where we kind of evaluated a number of programs, worked with a number of areas, and it was a bit patchy sort of practice spreading. So we set up the Better Work Network. So we got 500 people signed up to that, sharing their experiences in quite a light touch way as well, and gathering together resources and things like that. So I wonder if there's a kind of light touch point there. You know, Henry made the point that I know sort of all the combined authorities talk to each other regularly, but also someone has put in the chat that actually, you know, a number of local authorities will have less capacity to kind of think about some of these issues as well. So I kind of wonder if there's something about local authorities outside of combined authority areas as well.
Interesting. And Tony, you're nodding there, so I wondered if you wanted to come back on that, but also if you've got, you know, how are you thinking about kind of sharing what you're doing with others as well in this area? Sorry, you're on mute.
I was still doing that after 2 years. Unbelievable. Yeah, just nodding really with coming on Stephen's point. So we chair a local authority group in the West Midlands, so all of our 7 local authorities come together. As Henry said, we're not coterminous either, so 7 local authorities, 3 LEPs within the West Midlands, quite a complicated geography, and that creates its own kind of work, if you like, to bring some of this together. But we are using those, and our 20 colleges have got a collaborative group, Colleges West Midlands. So wherever possible, we're trying to use collaborative stakeholder groups as part of that engagement tool. And again, I would support what Stephen said around the piece of work that was done with your framework around better work. So something like that to share more broadly, because I think we can do things in our own region more easily than possibly sort of gathering that good practice from outside. So if that could be supported in some way, I think that would be a fantastic piece of work.
Great, thanks Tony. And Roger, so pleased you're joining us for this section. Wondered if you had any, we've just been talking about how innovation, first of all, in the kind of delivery and setup and delivery of this programme, but also in terms of sharing good practice kind of within and across regions. And I wondered if you had any particular reflections on that from your perspective.
I mean, this is something we discussed at the outset really, because we want to try and do something that's not just business as usual, but something that actually goes a little bit further, and innovation, I think, and something that's slightly different, we want to test out as much as possible. So, and I know the first year is supposed to be a testing year, and that's going to inform the following 2, but there's going to be an awful lot of change, I think, for a lot of the key stakeholders that will be involved in the engagement process, because I think, as everyone recognises, this isn't AEB, this isn't sort of the usual delivery of stuff. We're trying to get people that are very reluctant, averse or whatever to any kinds of maths or anything that says maths in it or numeracy somewhere close to the sort of provision that's there already. So the engagement needs to be innovative. It needs to be testing out different models of bringing people forward and then supporting them and giving them the sort of incentive, but also the confidence to do something as well. So I think for us, case studies are quite important, and the more that we can use those as a template for, not templates, but a bit extreme, but as a good example of how the engagement can work and what the mechanisms are, and if it's adaptable to other areas. I mean, it obviously will depend on the cohorts of people we're looking at, and I would imagine across the country there are going to be different pockets of certain areas where we want to target. And for us specifically, we do have a bit of a mix across South Yorkshire. There's some areas that are, more specific to certain groups of people that have got the different barriers, and that's the kind of thing we want to focus on really with the innovation, and that will come down to commissioning, which is the next big headache for us, I think, is to sort of how we're going to commission this, because we've kind of parked that a little bit while we get the scope right. Because the timescales, everybody knows, is so tight. We've got like a very limited amount of time to decide what to do, and then have someone react to that as well is quite tricky. So we want to do something realistic, innovative, but at the same time manageable and achievable. So it is a bit of a big ask, but I think the commissioning side of this will be determined by what the scope of our actual work is going to be.
Great, thanks, Roger. And I think there's commissioning points I suspect might come up over the next couple of questions and discussion that we're having. I'm getting quite a few questions through. I'm going to try and get through most of the topics, which are around funding and around how physically how things are going to be provided as well. But I just want to come to a couple of link questions. So a couple of people have asked, particularly in terms of capacity, in terms of delivery of the Multiply programs, and wondering where the tutors are going to come from, and sort of pointing out that actually there can be a bit of a lack of capacity. So it'd be good to hear your reflections whether that resonates with you and that's true in your region. And actually, someone saying, well, schools are struggling with maths teachers as it is. And actually, do you think that the Multiply tutors need to have a maths background in order to be able to provide this service as well? So quite broad, but really, I think it's really around capacity. So even when this is rolled out, do we have the right people in place to deliver the service as well? I don't know if who wants to kind of pick up that one. Henry.
Yeah, I can talk to that. Absolutely, in our region, we think that we don't have enough teachers to satisfy the demand in mainstream settings. And actually one of the challenges is that if you have a classic maths background, a degree in maths, for instance, you can earn very competitive salaries in a range of industries, and that might not necessarily be in terms of developing the future workforce or the current workforce. We don't think that you need a classic maths background to teach maths. And actually on that engagement side, on really drawing people back into maths, you need a kind of blended skill set, which both is making maths interesting, making maths accessible, and also being able to work with the individual as well. How far this budget can stretch to developing mathematicians, maths teachers, and also how quickly that capacity will impact on the market is quite questionable. But it's certainly something that we're looking at doing, and I think we may well use a portion, probably a limited portion of our funding to try and develop the staffing resource base in the region.
Great. Does anyone else on the panel want to come in on this one? It's obviously a really critical question. Roger, please. Yeah,
I'm quite happy to on that. And I think you're right, Henry. I think we don't need necessarily maths teachers as such. We need people that can engage with people, and that is the criteria, I think, to try and get them involved in something that's probably alien or, you know, something that they've got a lot of anxiety around. And I think having a basic understanding of maths is probably more important to try and present it in a way that's accessible, but also one that's I don't know, on their level, if you like, in a way, so that the person that needs to be doing this kind of work needs to be more of a buddy role, and in some cases, depending obviously the circumstances, but someone familiar, someone that looks like the person they're talking to in some ways. And this will be tricky in some areas. I think for us, we're going to have a capacity issue for some organisations. A lot of the ones maybe that deal with people with English of a certain language, for example, we need people from the same cohort of people to be able to support them as well. And I think that's where we need to look at where the focus is going to be first to determine the amount of capacity we need in certain areas. But I think in other places there may be sufficient if we're talking about in work. We have union learning reps, which are quite capable of working with people in the workplace and supporting them in a way that's, you know, not a barrier, but at the same time, you know, the familiar people. So it will depend for us on the scope of where we're going, but I think definitely there's going to be capacity issues, and we're going to have to certainly fund some aspects of this.
Thanks, Roger. Tony, Stephen, did you want to come in on this, or I'll move on to the next one? Tony.
Probably just to reinforce what's already been said, given that if you search on the Times Education website currently, which I've just done, there's 123 maths jobs advertised in the West Midlands alone. So we need to think about this slightly differently, and slightly, you know, out of the box in terms of, you know, who and how this might be delivered, because getting those traditional sort of roles, as Henry mentioned, is going to be difficult.
Great, thank you. Steve, did you want to come in?
I was going to answer a slightly different question and be a bit cheeky, but I just wanted, I'm conscious of time, and I've noted, so you may, I don't think you're about to ask me this, but on the mentors point, I'm pretty sure we did a maths mentors program in prisons a few years ago, so we might try and, assuming I haven't completely imagined that, which is entirely possible, we might try and dig out the resources we produce for that, and just see if that's of use and interest to colleagues as an approach. I'm just conscious that a number of people did ask in the chat about the modelling that I kind of talked about before, and the answer, how do you find out more about it? And the answer is talk to Alex Stevenson, who's our head of essential skills, and I think the team have posted email in the chat box, so basically bombard Alex with emails is the answer to that. And then there's kind of a question I was going to pose back a little bit to sort of colleagues dialed in. You know, so somebody asked about the fact that we've got combined authority speakers here, and what about local authorities outside that, where there might be a bit less capacity. So I'm kind of interested in what those capacity gaps might be. So is it about the kind of assessment of need, or the evidence of what works, or then we'll kind of do a great investment plan, but my goodness me, how am I going to find time to go and find all these tutors? Or just interested in kind of what some of the key gaps are in terms of how we might then think about how we can collectively support each other. So I've kind of answered a question, then also asked a question. So apologies for that, Naomi.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's great. And we've just got literally a couple of minutes left, but I just wanted to kind of maybe move on to the point around kind of evidence and so on, and actually how you're shaping the investment in all of this, and what kind of evidence and data and insights are you using to support the investment plan, the direction of the funds, and do you have any big gaps, I guess? Any areas of kind of concern for you, or actually feel like you've got kind of what you need?
Do you want to
yeah, go for it.
We're one of the SAP areas, so we do have a local skills report which we produce as part of that remit, which we're currently just completing at the moment. It was delayed due to commissioning processes, but that's going to be a vital piece of information. The side that we're kind of lacking in and still working with strategic partners around is the lower level, the entry level stuff, where it's in the community and the demand around those that we don't know. You know, it's the unknowns, I think, that are going to be the hard work. You know, we can find a lot of information about people that are taking courses and accessing courses and you know, where they're from, etc. But I think it's the ones that are off the radar that are going to be the tricky parts. So how much we can gain is going to be really difficult. So that's a lot of community engagement work, but we're trying to do a limited amount of that in the time available. So it's going to be tricky.
Thanks, Roger. Tony or Henry, any kind of thoughts or reflections on this one, or anything else that you want to chuck in before we finish? Henry. Oh, sorry, I'll go to Henry first and then to Tony.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're using a combination of kind of extrapolation of national data to understand an overall sense of scale, and then we're lucky enough to have a resourced sort of central intelligence function. So we've been able to also use, I think, some national numeracy reports and things like that, and extrapolate down so that we understand a bit more around which sectors low levels of numeracy will be experienced in. So we're able to target. But we're also working on the ground with our providers. So our providers actually sort of talking about what they know, what they see in the classroom, what they see from a recruitment perspective, how people present themselves, etc. And we've got 3 local authorities in our area, and we're working with their sort of community learning teams and community facing functions as well to sort of really understand a bit more detail about some of the key issues on the ground, and then trying to put that together into broad-based packages of work and specifications that we can put out that specific enough to draw us to the critical needs, but flexible enough to enable really good quality provision to come forwards and present the answers as well. So we don't want to be overtly directive to the market about how we need to solve this, but direct that provision to where we know we need it the most.
Thanks so much. And Tony, you have about 30 seconds, I'm afraid, but really keen to hear what you've got to say.
Probably a similar thing. We're using a number of methods. So OECD data. Stephen's outlined the Learning and Work Institute work that's been done, which has been a fantastic resource for us to understand that. Blending in with that LEP and LA data, and then we're doing a range of occupational sector-based employer plans. So we're factoring into that the kind of need that employers are articulating around numeracy as well. So it's a mix of a number of different intelligence sources.
Perfectly timed. Stephen.
Sorry, just very quickly, like 20 seconds. So I've got 2 answers to my question, so I thought I'd respond to them, but not least because I can't work out how to press reply on the app. So I think the answer was most of the things are a bit of a challenge, and then there's also the join up with Shared Prosperity Fund and evaluation. I guess I know we're kind of running out of time today, but I'm very interested from local authority colleagues about what would be helpful on that, whether it's a local authority focused webinar or whether it's some of the links that we've got, or what else would be helpful. So please just drop us a line to let us know.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Stephen. So I am now going to close the event because we're exactly on time. I just wanted to thank our guests, so much for your contributions and being so open. This feels like a topic that I know we're going to come back to, and maybe we'll do another one of these or something with local authorities or a bit of a mix. We've been recording this event. It will be available on YouTube. We will, I think, be sending participants an email as well with some resources and links and ways to follow up as well. And as Stephen said, we really are interested in what's going on out there, and kind of any help that we can provide as well. So do drop us an email, get in touch with us, but also if you don't already, please do follow us on Twitter, which is @LearnWorkUK. We'll be tweeting all of this stuff and the links as well, so it's a resource, but you can also message us through that function as well. Thank you so much again. Thank you all for joining. That's it.